The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog and join the Progressive Army. And now, ladies and gentlemen,
we are now about to witness the truth.
It's the Benjamin Dixon Show.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Benjamin Dixon Show. I am your host, Benjamin Dixon. It is Monday, May 9th, 2016. I want to thank you for joining me. There's a lot happening in the news tonight. I want to talk about the protest in East LA that we briefly talked about on last Thursday. There seems to be a whole lot more that has happened as a result of those protests. Also, I think it's big news coming out of North Korea. North Korea is signaling that they want to not necessarily normalize relations. They haven't gone that far, but they have definitely softened their rhetoric and their approach. We'll talk about that. At the top, we're going to talk about North Carolina getting sued by the Justice Department. And last but not least, I think the story that stood out the most to me, Muslim leaders in the West wage a theological battle against ISIS. And as a result, ISIS has listed several American Muslims, both religious Muslims and political leaders that are Muslims. They've listed them on essentially their hit list. So I want to talk about all that tonight. So you can join the conversation, 857-600-0518. And later on in the show, I'll be joined by one of the protesters that were in East LA on Thursday to talk more specifically about the whitewashing of Hillary, the protesters who were there by Hillary Clinton's team. It's the same story, different day, different demographic, because anyone who opposes Hillary Clinton must be your standard typical white Bernie bro, essentially, is what the story has become. So let's start with North Carolina. North Carolina, and you can see on my screen now, that picture is coming up now. But North Carolina, in the news today, Governor Pat McCrory has declared that he's not going to change his position or his lawsuit against the Justice Department where it comes to HB2, essentially the transphobic piece of legislation that requires people use the restroom based on the identity, on the gender that they were born at birth versus the identity for which they identify, the gender for which they identify. Also today, Attorney General Loretta Lynch came out saying that this legislation is discriminatory and that the Justice Department is going to sue or is suing the state of North Carolina, the University of North Carolina, as well as other stakeholders in the state for discrimination. She's saying at face value, this is a discriminatory act that's reminiscent of Jim Crow, that's reminiscent of days gone by where discrimination was codified in the United States. As a result of this lawsuit from Loretta Lynch and the Justice Department, the state of North Carolina is positioned to lose hundreds of millions of dollars of funding from the federal government. Now, we talked about this last week. The things that have changed today simply are the fact that you have competing lawsuits now, one coming from North Carolina, the other coming from the Justice Department. Immediately after Loretta Lynch did her press conference, Pat McCrory joined PBS NewsHour, where he stated the reason and the justification for his lawsuit, essentially saying that as a part of his lawsuit, he is seeking for the opportunity to get clarification of the law, particularly as it pertains to gender identity and the role of gender identity in the use of public facilities. He said that the federal government, or not the federal government rather, but the executive branch does not have the ability to interpret law. And so he is seeking to get clarification from the judicial branch stating how and where gender identity plays a role in the usage of public facilities, and what constitutional right do they have to use restrooms that align with their gender identity versus the gender that they were born at birth. I'm interested in this story for many reasons. One, because of the blatant fear mongering that's going on from the right, and lest I put this all at the feet of Republicans, those 11 Democrats, 5 of whom are Hillary Clinton supporters, signed onto this legislation, essentially codifying discrimination, using fear mongering as their number one tactic to get this passed. And I want to share on the screen a pretty offensive image, political cartoon that I want to share. And I'm sharing it because I want you to understand what goes on in the minds of people who are opposing or people who are promoting this legislation. We're all adults. We can handle this. So this is a political cartoon, and I don't have to interpret it for you, but this is the type of propaganda that is used to push this fear-based legislation that is spreading across the country. This is something that I was tagged in, and instead of me letting them have it on Facebook, I said, let me just save it for the show. Because this is the image, this is what they want to spread. Enough of that. This is what they want to spread across the United States as a means of justifying this legislation that is both discriminatory, but is also a means to control on the state level local municipalities and municipalities, local city governments, from making their own anti-discrimination or discrimination policies. So it is a very nefarious thing that these states are doing, and these political leaders, primarily on the right, primarily Republican, primarily conservative Christians, they're doing this as a means of control and as a means of trying to keep things the way they were. And political cartoons like the one I showed is right in line, as disgusting as that cartoon was, it is right in line with what a lot of conservatives tend to think with regard to not just the transgender community, but specifically in this case, the transgender community. This type of perverting and fear mongering goes to everything that they oppose, right? They draw this caricature of everything they oppose, every person they oppose, and every community they oppose. They draw a twisted, demented, devil-like caricature of the human beings that are now subject to the rules that they create. They're subject to the blowback from this type of propaganda, because you can't spread propaganda like that. You can't spread fear like that, and you can't spread hatred like that and not see real tangible ramifications in the lives of the transgender community. You can't. It's not possible. And this is something that I will give PBS NewsHour credit for, because they continue to hit Pat McCrory on the fact that this legislation alone is a means of continuing, or would he at least admit that this further exacerbates the trauma that this particular community has faced, much of which we're not even capable of describing, right? We're not even capable of identifying with, because it's not something that happens to us that are not transgendered. But legislation like this is passed using fear tactics, using using the most disgusting techniques possible, and the legislation is passed. So now you have a double whammy impact on the lives of transgender people. Now they are faced with not able to use public facilities for the gender for which they identify, but then they're also faced with the blowback from this type of legislation, these types of conversations, and this type of propaganda that's used to pass this type of legislation. Now, with all that being said, I want to point out something that McCrory, I think, and legal scholars, you can correct me if I'm wrong, I actually think that depending on the makeup of the Supreme Court, if this actually reaches the Supreme Court coming from McCrory, then it is an opportunity for the Supreme Court to give some final say in terms of what America will look like for the transgender community. And I think this is McCrory's way of passing the responsibility to be a decent human being off his shoulders and onto the shoulders of the judicial system, which is, at the end of the day, I think, if it depends on what the final makeup is. I'm not even sure that with the 4-4 split, that something like this would be decided, or if it would be sent back to a lower court. So it will be interesting to see how this plays out. And this is a part of the unfortunate growing pains, this legal process, not the bigotry. Well, unfortunately, the bigotry is a part of America. Right. And if we're ever going to grow beyond the bigotry, we have to confront the bigotry. So that, too, I would say, is a part of the unfortunate growing pains. But this is something that's finally come to a head. And it's a signal to Mississippi. It's a signal to Georgia. It's a signal to all the other states that are wanting to pass this legislation that the federal government is going to, at least the executive branch, per the Justice Department, is going to fight on behalf of the transgendered community. So we'll keep our eye on that story as more information comes out. But I thought today was an interesting day, particularly because it brought the state of North Carolina to in a heads-up match with the federal government. And let's see what happens. But always remember that this legislation wasn't just passed with Republicans. It was also passed with Democrats as well. So when they say unite blue, which blue are they talking about? Those blue that voted for this. Okay, let me shift to North Korea rather. And depending on who you ask, they might make the same mistake. And actually, the phone lines are open. If you want to join the conversation on anything that we're discussing tonight, feel free to call in 857-600-0518. I do want to talk about North Korea and some news. So I was riding the train this morning and I saw the headline that North Korea let's see if that works for me. Yep, that's what I needed. So North Korea has signaled to the international community that they want to. Well, you know what? Let me put it in their own words. I don't want to put words in their mouth because it's not necessarily it's not clear cut. But a couple of key takeaways that came from the conference that the North Korean political party in power had. Some of the key takeaways that the party, of course, led by Kim Jong-un, came out with the decision that they want to focus now. They have a 5-year plan to focus on the economy of North Korea, with emphasis on improving the living standards and at the same time pursuing nuclear weapons. And so North Korea is attempting to walk a thin line between being a member of the international community while simultaneously maintaining and not succumbing to the pressure of the international community, particularly as it pertains to nuclear weapons. This is a fine line, but some of the key statements that came out of this was the statement that as a responsible nuclear weapon state, our republic will not use a nuclear weapon to unless its sovereignty is encroached upon by any aggressive hostile forces with nuclear weapons. I thought that was a very, very interesting and revealing statement. They also said that they are willing to reconcile with the South unless Seoul is opts for war. So they extended an olive branch, somewhat a knowledge branch in that regard, simultaneously saying we can have peace, but we also want to keep our nuclear weapons. The statement that came out to me that was the strongest statement was something that some analysts believe was pointed towards the United States. They said that the North is willing to develop friendly relations even with countries that have in the past been hostile towards it. And they also said that they have no intention of unilaterally giving up the nuclear program or bending to international pressures. So they're doing their best to show strength for their local population, for their domestic populace, right? And at the same time, they're saying, but we want to focus on our economy, but we're not going to focus on our economy to the extent that we're going to give up our nuclear weapons. And so they're trying to have their cake, obviously, and eat it too. But just the mere fact that they're sending these signals opens up the possibility of having a future with a regime there that is not isolated. And I was listening to, I believe it had to be Robert Reich or N. Brimmer. I'm not sure because I kind of listen to them often. And one of them said that the biggest threat is having an isolated regime with nuclear weapons, not just a nuclear armed regime, but a nuclear armed regime that's isolated. And they were using this in regards to Iran, saying that even if Iran in the future becomes a nuclear power, the more integrated they are into the international community, the less dangerous that regime is. And they parallel that. They use Iran to contrast with North Korea, saying that North Korea is the real threat, even though they are not as scientifically advanced with their missile and their range and the ICBMs. They do have an incentive that nations who are integrated in the international community do not have. And that is they're already isolated. They've already lost so much. Their economy is already destroyed and they have nothing to lose. And so the most dangerous thing is a nuclear power that has nothing to lose. And that's exactly what North Korea has been and continues to be. But coming out of their conference, they have announced that they're not willing to give up their nuclear program, their nuclear capabilities, but they are willing to have a conversation about their economy and being nice, or not being nice, but opening up relationships with countries that have formerly been hostile to them. When I read this story, I really think about the power of money and the ability of, and this is really a neoliberal thought, right? This is neoliberal not in the pejorative sense, but neoliberal in the political science sense, that the more integrated our international community becomes, the less likely war is. And in the neoliberal political theory thought, it goes along these lines where, the more integrated we are, the less likely we are to fight. And the normal relationship, the normal activity, there it goes. My IR theory came back to me. The normal actions and relationships that communities have in the international community, that nations have in the international community, is trade. And that's the behavior that you should expect in a global society versus a realist paradigm that says the normal interaction between states in this international community is conflict. neoliberalism in the political science sense, not the DLC third way American interpretation, but in the global sense, really dictates that the best way for us to not have the third world war would be for us to all integrate seamlessly economically. And this is what it sounds like North Korea is entertaining. And the reason I'll go ahead and confidently say that this is a true message of something that they want to do is because the very conversation, this conversation in North Korea could very well undermine the legitimacy of Kim Jong-un. You know, if you think about the hardliners in North Korea. The hardliners in North Korea are just as bad, if not worse, as any hardliner in Russia or in the United States, for that matter. So any sign of weakness is something that they will pounce on. Any sign of compromise is something they will pounce on. And vocally saying and openly saying that we want to have relationships with states that have in the past been hostile towards us, and saying that we want to put a focus on our economy and increase the living standards is a clear signal that you want to get integrated in this international global economy and reap some of the benefits of capitalism, which simultaneously means you're going to reap some of the downfalls and failures of capitalism. But that's a whole conversation for another day. The point is that this conversation really puts Kim Jong-un on the line because it opens him up to a massive criticism from the hardliners in the state. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out, if it plays out at all, or was this just a piece of propaganda to lull the West? All right, let's see where we are. Okay, I've got 5 minutes before I do speak with one of the protesters that were in East LA. So in that 5 minutes, I want to talk about news that's not really news. News that's not really news. Here in Massachusetts, Donald Trump, the polling for Donald Trump, his negative ratings in Massachusetts are over 60%. Hillary Clinton's approval ratings are at 43%, 47%. Bernie Sanders' approval rating is 55%. So the news that's not news is that in a liberal, overwhelmingly liberal state, Donald Trump is going to get his ass handed to him. A part of this that was interesting, the only reason I bring it up is because our Republican governor here in Massachusetts, Charlie Baker, has favorable ratings of 65.6%. Now, that's news. You know, he's been in office at least 2.5 years now, going on 3 years, if not 3 years already. And he still has favorable ratings of over 60%. Now, the reason that's actually news is because he has a higher approval rating than Elizabeth Warren. Her home state, our senator, she has an approval rating, which is great. It's 51.8%. But it is not as good as the Republican governor, Charlie Baker. But overall, this is news that's not news because it is a liberal state, and Charlie Baker is about as liberal as you can get out of a Republican. He is not the conservative that some of these conservative talk show hosts around here would like, which reminds me, like, where is the progressive radio, local radio here in Boston? I know there's one guy, but there's like 20 hours a day of conservative talk radio here in Massachusetts, particularly Boston. And I'll tell you this, Charlie Baker is not the type of Republican that Howie Carr would like at all here locally. But the only reason I really brought up this news that's not news is because of another piece of news that's not news, and that's connected with Elizabeth Warren and Donald Trump. Over the weekend, Friday night, Elizabeth Warren had a Twitter battle with Donald Trump. And the reason it's not news, but I'll mention it, is because there's no big surprise. There's no surprise whatsoever that a liberal, progressive politician is going to think and say and believe, and as well as I do that Donald Trump is a cretin, right? That's not news. It's not even worth mentioning in a headline. But what is worth mentioning is the type of behavior that Donald Trump is able to get other people to behave in, to carry themselves in. Some of the tweets on Friday night from Elizabeth Warren were spot on. They were great. I didn't want to hear them because she hasn't said anything else in this primary. She didn't say anything to support or go against Bernie Sanders. She didn't say anything to support or go against Hillary Clinton. She just sat on the sideline. And to me, I talked about this last week. That's a sign of cowardice, in my opinion. It is what it is, right? We are waging an ideological, philosophical war in the Democratic Party and people on the left, and for the very definition of progressivism and Elizabeth Warren set out. And so it's not news for her to jump in and attack Donald Trump. But what is news is that Donald Trump was able to get her out of character, and for some of her tweets calling Donald Trump lame and talking about him coming back in his tweets and basically having a Twitter feud instead of using Twitter as a means of communicating your idea in a forceful and intelligent way. She actually had one tweet in there, which, it gets the best of us. And, I've had one or two that actually the one I sent about Elizabeth Warren, so we can't be flawless all the time. But I mention that because Donald Trump has the ability to pull people out of character, and that is his number one gift. That is his number one tactic, and I don't think the Democrats are ready. They're trying to run Hillary Clinton against him, and Hillary Clinton and Elizabeth Warren, if what you guys have done and presented so far is your best against the type of childishness and rhetoric and vitriol that Donald Trump is going to throw at you, then the left side of America is in trouble because Donald Trump is coming full force. And you cannot respond to Donald Trump with you can't out-stupid Donald Trump. Donald Trump is as stupid as they come. You cannot, you can't. And so you shouldn't try. Look at Marco Rubio. Marco Rubio, I don't like Marco Rubio's politics, but he was a pretty shrewd politician until this primary, right? And in this primary, he tried to go heads up with Donald Trump, and he tried to go heads up with Donald Trump's stupidity, and it backfired on him. So the moral of the story is twofold. One, why wait till now to say something to Elizabeth Warren? I'm going to ask that every single week. But then two, more importantly, do not let Donald Trump bring you down to his size, because he is better at being dumb. He's better at being stupid. He's better. And we expect that of him. And we expect so much more out of people that we think fondly of. Simple as that. All right. So the conversation is going to begin tonight, 857-600-0518. We'll be joined momentarily by by one of the activists that were in East LA, and we want to talk about more specifically the whitewashing of the protesters there, the brilliant whitewashing of the protesters that were there by Hillary Clinton. So I think I have him on the line. Tony, how are you?
Well, I'm doing good.
Awesome, man. Thank you for joining me. We're just doing an audio call here. So first of all, tell us a little bit about yourself and your participation in the protest.
Well, I mostly went after seeing organizers that told me, there's going to be a protest against Hillary Clinton. And it was mostly organized by Mecha, young Chicano students from around East Los Angeles.
Mm-hmm.
But it was a very diverse crowd, mostly leftists, progressives, for that fact. And that's what kind of left me feeling odd that I come back home and I check Twitter and everyone was pretty much just brushing it off and saying, it was Bernie Sanders event. It was nothing but Bernie people. And in reality, they were a minority amongst the group, maybe just about a dozen among hundreds.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And
Go ahead.
oh no, go on. Yeah.
Oh, so I was going to ask you. So let's start at the beginning. These were protests in East LA. It was protest. Tell us some of the reasons the protesters were out there.
It was a wide variety of reasons. The two most common ones that I noticed there were people upset at Hillary for her role in the coup in Honduras and the murder of Berta, as a result.
Mm-hmm.
And also people upset that Hillary, who had made remarks against immigrants, send immigrant kids back,
Mm-hmm.
having pretty much the same views as Trump, and they felt it was disrespectful for her to come to an immigrant community such as East Los Angeles.
Mm-hmm.
So those were like the two biggest factors that I noticed there.
And an article that I was reading about it was one particular participant in the protest. She was inside of the facilities and she was nervous and she didn't know if she was going to actually shout and carry out her action. But then she saw the mariachi bands and she saw the way that Hillary was pandering to East LA on Cinco de Mayo. And I saw another commenter say that East LA only mattered to Hillary Clinton on Cinco de Mayo, and it's actually worse because this is Cinco de Mayo in election years because she's not going to be there at any other time. So there seems to be a lot of pushback on the pandering, and so all of these people that were there for all the different reasons that you listed. When we got to Monday morning, or not even Monday morning, we got over the weekend, all of a sudden it became only about Bernie Sanders and a complete whitewashing, acting as though that these people were not protesting from a cultural perspective that was relevant to your community, but just protesting Hillary because you guys didn't like Hillary. Unpack some of that whitewashing for me.
Yeah, one of the first comments I had seen, and someone had tagged me to it because I guess some Hillary supporters were either having trouble finding us on Twitter or they didn't care. It was a little mix of both because many people linked them to my tweets while I was there, and they all just, their first mentions was, oh, I guarantee you it's just a fringe group of white Bernie bros.
Mm-hmm.
And whenever I would reply or anybody else that was there, I got to meet a few people, including the young woman who protested inside the rally. Everyone just seemed to brush us off. They would block us or just dismiss us. And they got really upset the minute they found out it wasn't a Bernie planned event. They weren't the majority. There were maybe a dozen or so.
Mm-hmm.
There was even one Trump supporter there that was there. I don't know. He was in the wrong crowd for the most part. But yeah, it was really odd.
So,
But
go ahead.
yeah, I mean, it was kind of this thing. Someone had mentioned to me too, I think today on Twitter, where they said people of color will only matter to Hillary so long as they're her props. As soon as she's done with them, and the supporters as well,
Mm-hmm.
they're gone. And that's kind of what happened at the rally. As supporters left, everyone on Twitter kept telling me, her supporters saying, "How dare you? That was a Hispanic rally. Her supporters are Hispanic."
Right.
Every single person that I saw waiting in line, I'll say 80% white. And I could tell they had never gone to East Los Angeles before. That was their first and possibly the only time. And as they were exiting, this young woman started, shouting at her supporters, "I hope you enjoyed your first visit to East LA. Back to Beverly Hills you go."
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this is the spin, Tony, that gets me. The spin that gets me, I was reading your timeline. First of all, what's your Twitter handle?
It's a Mexican anarchist.
So it's like Mexican anarchist, but without the two ANs. Or we'll
Correct. Yeah.
tweet me, and then I'll retweet your handle because I want everyone to read your timeline. That's why I wanted to call you on the show, because you were doing on your timeline what I've invested a lot of time in doing, particularly with the black community, right? So in the black community, you've had people constantly erase the fact that we are black people who, one, just oppose Hillary Clinton for many historical reasons. And two, maybe we're Bernie Sanders supporters. A lot of us are, but that's not the reason we oppose Hillary Clinton. We would oppose Hillary Clinton if it's just Hillary Clinton by herself. But the spin has been that as long as they're able to whitewash black and brown supporters of Bernie Sanders or black or brown people who are against Hillary Clinton, they've been able to co-opt the message and make it seem like Hillary Clinton is the queen of intersectionality. Hillary Clinton is the queen of the black community and the brown communities. All of that while the very people who are doing the protesting are brown and black people. Tell me a little bit more about that whitewashing that you've seen and some of your responses to it.
Well, one of the more common, responses I've gotten to people upset that, oh, it wasn't a Bernie rally, and B, it was mostly people of color. We even had a Black Lives Matter activist there to support us, and they told us kind of what we knew is Hillary's acting like she wants to be a part of your community. She will destroy it. That will be her end game there. And yeah, the pandering from her supporters online, and in person, they will say things like, oh, we need to hear about more black and brown voices, women of color, we're intersectional.
Yeah.
And there's that famous photo of the young woman who protested inside the rally, and there's like a white guy, a Hillary supporter, just has his hand over her face, and she's trying to say her piece.
Yeah.
And she's the one that told me that they assaulted her inside, and deputies dragged her out, not the supporters who attacked her. And there was another young man as well inside that also was attacked. So I told all these Hillary supporters that were telling me that, we were the violent ones because we were unruly, or we were yelling, we were being rude.
Right.
And I'm like, well, you know what? If you want, I'll apologize. We're sorry we're a little aggravated, but yeah. I'm like, well, you guys apologize for the actual violent events that happened inside. Nobody wants to apologize. Many don't even want to say it happened. One woman even said, I don't think he hit her. It looks like he's waving. And I don't know too many people that wave by reaching way out to the side over someone else's face. So, yeah, they're really just trying to clean up, their mess they left behind.
I wish I had that picture handy, but you did tweet that out, and I retweeted that because your statement above it was brilliant, right? So online, they're saying, let's be intersectional. Let's hear voices of women. Let's hear voices of minorities and black and brown voices. And in real life, you see a Hillary Clinton supporter doing the exact opposite, trying to silence a brown woman, a woman of color, at the very most important point where she's desperately trying to get her voice heard. I thought that was a brilliant juxtaposition that you did there. And you also pointed out one other thing that I meant to talk about tonight, but I completely forgot until you just mentioned it, that according to one survey, Hillary Clinton supporters are more aggressive than Bernie Sanders supporter, John Kasich supporters, even more aggressive than Ted Cruz's supporters. Hillary Clinton supporters online are second only to Donald Trump. Like that blows your mind when you consider their ability to simultaneously co-opt the message of being persecuted when they are actually the ones out here doing the most aggressive and the most disgusting type of social online warfare. Tony, listen, man, thanks so much for joining me at the last second. Tell everyone how to get up with you and where they can find out more about what you guys are working on.
For me personally, they just find me on Twitter. If anybody is curious, I could also link them to people that were also involved in the protests, that they were there, and I got to meet them, which I'm really thankful for. These are younger activists that are coming up on their own. It's like a new breath of life I've been seeing, like within social movements, is these youngsters that don't want to accept it as it is anymore. And yeah, if anybody wants to just tweet at me, and I'll link them to these people. They want to talk to them some more, get to know us, and things like that.
Awesome, man. Hey, thanks so much for joining me, and I'll catch you on Twitter.
All right, man. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. 857-600-0518. You could join the conversation, and we talk about anything that we've talked about so far tonight. But yeah, that blew me away. Hillary Clinton supporters are more aggressive online than Bernie Sanders supporters. I'm trying to get the original article, and I'll share it. It's a survey, actually, from onlineharassmentdata.org. And they've tried to ascertain which group of supporters were the most aggressive. And in the background, this is the context that I want to cast the rest of this conversation in. In the background, I've had this up since the beginning of the show, and it is an image of a Hillary Clinton. And actually, let me pull it up on your main screen. It is an image of Hillary Clinton's a Hillary Clinton supporter coming through triumphantly through the very protests that Tony was talking about just a moment ago, where people were protesting Hillary Clinton's involvement in the Honduras coup, Hillary Clinton's switching back and forth on immigration policies. And in 2014, Hillary Clinton said that children who came, that they could themselves be deported. And now her policies are changing. And then she has the nerve to come to a historic Hispanic and Latino community in East LA on Cinco de Mayo with the mariachi band and like straight pander to the community. And so the image, again, that's on your screen is of a woman who's coming through triumphant, that she's made it through the gauntlet of opposition, and she's persevered through all of the forces that are trying to keep her from getting to Hillary. And this triumphant image has become kind of a flashpoint for a symbol for the Hillary Clinton movement. If you read comments online about this, people are saying how this embodies everything about this race, because Hillary Clinton has been for women of color, and they have constantly had to fight back against men and white men, and they erased everything. If you read, I want you to read the 150 words from Peter Dow at Blue Nation Review, which is essentially just a hit piece machine for Hillary Clinton. It's a progressive rag, a liberal rag for Hillary Clinton. And on this article, he erases everything about the identities of the people who are there, the ethnicity, the reason they were protests. He even erased where they protested, what they protested for. He erased that they were mainly all Hispanic. He erased the everything about this and minimized it to just being about the persecution that women and Hillary Clinton supporters have had to face in the face of Bernie Sanders supporters. All the while, Hillary Clinton's supporters have been more aggressive online than Bernie Sanders supporters, according to onlineharassmentdata.org. This is you. Listen, I want somebody to make a sign for me that says, don't feed the persecution complex. Right? Because an image like this that you see on my screen is exactly what people who believe that they have been persecuted so much by the Bernie bros, they needed an image like this, because it's, get your life, girl. Queen slay Hillary. Like, this is, you're overcoming, all the while ignoring and erasing the reality that these people are protesting Hillary Clinton's very dangerous and nefarious involvement in regime change, particularly in Honduras. Hillary Clinton's very draconian perspectives on deportation of children. They have the right to be there. If anybody's persecuted, it's the Hispanic and the Latino community that has been persecuted. But that doesn't matter, because your girl coming through, we done made it, child. If you feed the persecution complex, they will always believe that they are the ones who are suffering. They are the ones who are being persecuted and pressed down, all the while they have been the ones that have been the most aggressive and in my opinion, barbaric online. And they've been able to co-opt and whitewash people of color, black people, Hispanic people, and now they've co-opted the people who are genuinely persecuted and have been damaged by the policies of Hillary Clinton. This is a masterstroke of propaganda. Not so much this image. The image is good timing. The image is like shit. It was a great capture. It was a great image. But the ability of Hillary Clinton's supporters to simultaneously be the oppressor and feign as if they are oppressed is classic persecution complex 101. And the only thing I've seen similar to this are the Christian persecution complexers. Yeah, I just made that word up, complexers. The people who are Christian, who are in North Carolina, saying that they feel like they are going to be oppressed because they have to dare use a restroom with a transgender woman or a transgender man. All the while they are doing the oppression, keeping transgender women and men from being able to publicly use facilities. That's the only thing I have ever seen in my lifetime that has compared to this Hillary Clinton team persecution complex. And this picture perfectly personifies. It personifies their ability to, in the very face of the people who have been hurt the most by Hillary Clinton, we made it, child, to come through like they've been through the struggle, when they have caused the struggle, like they have been the only ones to suffer online. Like the only context by which you can understand online harassment is through the lens of Hillary Clinton. Like the only context that you can understand sexism is sexism that Hillary Clinton supporters face, because there's no way possible that Bernie Sanders supporters have ever faced sexism, racism, classism, and every other ism. No way. The only people who have suffered in America right now in this competition are Hillary Clinton supporters. Meanwhile, they run through the gauntlet, completely ignoring and whitewashing the people who have been damaged by Hillary Clinton. That's the shit I don't like, man. Hashtag I'm with Miss Ann. I want you guys to go check out Noah Chonga's timeline. She had a beautiful tweet storm on that on yesterday. All right, what do I have left? I've got 10 minutes left. And I've got 2 more stories to talk about. I think I could do it. And honestly, I think this is my favorite story of the day. Muslim leaders in the West wage a theological battle against ISIS, and they have been targeted by ISIS. The reason this is my favorite story of the day is because there's always this narrative from the right and from people on the left, surprisingly enough, demanding that moderate Muslims stand up and do something and speak out against the fundamentalist Muslims who want to wage jihad. This is a constant and persistent narrative. It's almost like the narrative of that they use against Black Lives Matter, that, you need to address the violence in your community and Black people need to stand up and address them. You know that narrative. And it's not, in this regard, it's not without some validity, right? Because, this war against ISIS, I've heard from King Abdullah of Jordan, from many Muslim scholars. They admit that this war is for the soul of Islam, and this war can only be won by Muslims. So in this context, it really has validity because it is going to require moderate Muslims to fight back against the fundamentalist extreme theology of ISIS. The theology of ISIS is so extreme that even devout Muslims who do not bow before their caliphate are considered enemies of Islam to ISIS. They're considered infidels. And some of the number one group of victims at the hands of the violence of ISIS has been Muslims, Christians, and other groups in the Middle East, but particularly Muslims. And so here in the West, in America, the United States particularly, you have several imams who have come out and attacked ISIS from a theological perspective, undermining ISIS's interpretation of the Quran, undermining their interpretation of jihad, their interpretation of many of the fundamental scriptures that ISIS use to legitimize their campaign and to even try to legitimize their caliphate. There have been a list of leaders here in the West that have been targeted now by ISIS because their effects and their reach has grown tremendously and significantly. So now people in the United States are being targeted by ISIS because they're preaching a version of Islam that undermines and invalidates what ISIS stands for. Now, as I'm reading, it's not necessarily a full moderate interpretation of Islam across the board. Some of it is, particularly, I'm looking at Imam Suhaib Webb. What I was reading in his interpretation and what he's trying to present seem to be more moderate than what other imams are presenting. But even though the people who are attacking ISIS theologically, even though they don't agree with each other, they do agree that ISIS is spreading a perversion of Islam that is damning to Islam itself, as well as the many thousands of lives that that ISIS has taken. So I thought this was a beautiful take on a different take on this question of ISIS and the international community and the war against ISIS. And it shows the efficacy of people from a particular group being and doing the work of addressing the fundamentalists from that group. It is, because I'm going to be honest with you, let's just call a spade a spade. I mean, if you're waiting on religion to go before we have peace, good luck with that, right? I mean, how many billions of people are religious? Religion isn't going anywhere anytime soon. And if we have to wait for religion to go for peace to come, then good luck with that. But to me, it's going to require people from those communities. It's going to require, and what's most interesting about this is that it generally aligns with people who have more progressive ideologies and progressive politics and more left-leaning politics. The religious right in any religion is always the fundamentalist. The religious right of, I don't care if it's Judaism, Christianity, or Islam, it is the fundamentalist group. And this is not to say that only people on the right are capable of doing barbaric things. That's not what I'm saying at all. But in terms of religion, the people on the right are usually, generally, the fundamentalists. And it takes the more moderate and people on the left, the religious left, the Christian left, for example, to combat the ills that are found on the extreme right of a religion. And I think that's the best way to moderate some of the insanity that can come out of any religion. And I know there's a lot of people, well, anyway, I don't get to talk about religion much on my show, even though that's one of the first things that I talked about politically. But I like this story. So check that out in the New York Times. Muslim leaders in the West wage a theological battle. Another interesting thing that I want to point out is that that the Islamic State, I'm sorry, I don't want to call them that, Daesh and ISIL have targeted American Muslims in government as well, particularly Keith Ellison. Keith Ellison is a person who supports Bernie Sanders, and he has a long resume that stands on his own, but some of you would know him instantly from the fact that he supports Bernie Sanders. He has been targeted, along with some of these imams, the more moderate imams that are preaching a theology against ISIS. They've been targeted, and the threats are credible enough that the FBI has reached out to each of them to help them fortify and to prepare and to, take care of the necessary precautions. So, yeah, man, just a lot of respect for them taking that on willingly. Okay. Wow. 3 minutes to go. Let me close my notes. I want to talk about for like 3 to 5. I don't know how much time I have left. I've got to talk to Democrats, particularly neoliberal Democrats. I was reading articles and tweets and just consuming everything that I always consume. And it dawned on me. It dawned on me that politicians, politicos, journalists, the establishment, the media elite, all of them have a secret that they're not willing to tell you, that they're not willing to confess, even though we know they're not willing to confess. And I'm not talking about Republicans. I'm talking about Democrats. I'm talking about neoliberal Democrats, third way Democrats. I'm talking about the DLC, the Democratic Leadership Council Democrats. I'm talking about the secret that they will never own up to. And that secret is that they have accepted and they are okay with all of the problems of our economic system, of capitalism. They won't admit to it. They won't cop to it. They'll keep pretending as though they're populist. They'll keep pretending as though they have the concerns of the average American in their heart, when in reality, they have accepted as normal structural unemployment and structural poverty. They have accepted that our system is what it is and that we don't need to improve on it anymore. Just take it for what it's worth, because if you work, they've also bought into this idea that if you just work hard enough, you can overcome all of the forces of our economic system that are keeping you down. They're not going to admit to that. They're not going to admit to that because you know why? They won't expressly say it, because if they expressly say it, then you will realize that it's not possible for them to have the best interest of the average American in their minds or in their policies, more importantly. Because if you accept that unemployment has to be at a certain level for us to maintain the type of inflation that is acceptable, then you can't possibly really be concerned with the average American, because the average American is seriously affected by the unemployment rate. If you accept that international trade has the effects of depressing, in most cases, has the effect of depressing wages, and you just accept that without fighting against that, then you cannot possibly have the best interest in mind for the average American, because the average American is going to be struggling for those wages that you don't even have to worry about, because you have your career that's not dependent upon the minimum wage. So you have a lot of factors that Democrats have accepted at face value, and they will never admit to it, or they may be an uninformed voter who is not aware of it. Because you have a lot of people who genuinely believe that the Democratic Party is still the party for the average American, and that is simply not the case anymore. You have a new breed who've been here for 30 years, but it's still a new breed of Democrat who is more concerned with their stock portfolio. They're more concerned with how the Dow Jones is doing. They're more concerned with how their shipping exports are doing in their trade. They're more concerned with everything except the underlying fundamental problems of our economic system. Our system is rigged against the average American that has to pay as much rent as their landlord is going to charge them, but gets paid the lowest amount that their employee can afford to pay them or wants to pay them. These are structural problems in our economy that are not going away, no matter if it's a Republican in office or a Democrat in office, because they've accepted the fundamental underlying idea that this is the best we can do. And once you accept the idea that this is the best we can do, you are no longer concerned about all the people who are getting screwed by the system that you think is the best that we can do. You no longer start to think innovatively. You no longer start trying to figure out how do we fix it for the average person. And all you're concerned about is how do we continue this comfortable regime, this economic regime that has benefited the elite, the top middle class, and the top 1%. Democrats, I'm not even talking about Republicans. I'm not talking about Republicans at all. I'm talking about your limousine liberal. I'm talking about your $1 million a year earner. I'm talking a Democrat who is concerned about social issues, but if you ever talk about class issues, they'll change the conversation. I'm talking about people who are rallying behind Hillary Clinton because either they have not admitted to themselves, either they don't know, or they are fully aware and will never admit to you the reality that they have accepted the system as it is, and they think that this is the best that we can do. And by default, that means that they do not have the best interest of all the people who are left out of the system, all of the people who are part of that structural unemployment, structural poverty, all of the failings of capitalism. They're not concerned about the people who are impacted by it because they think this is the best we can do. Or they've done so good that they actually believe that all you have to do is get a good education and everything else will fix itself. And so they either don't want to admit it, or they possibly don't even know. And when I think about Hillary Clinton, and I'm gonna let you guys go on this. When I think about Hillary Clinton, I realize that for me personally, you can think what you want to think, but Hillary Clinton, I don't think Hillary Clinton is evil. I don't think Hillary Clinton is the devil. I don't think she's any more problematic than your American president in the past, because the American presidency has had its problems and has been problematic for a very long time. I don't think Hillary Clinton is evil. I just think that Hillary Clinton isn't going to do a damn thing to change the economic status quo that has been hurting the average American for the last 40 years. And I genuinely hope that if she gets elected, if she's the one who gets the White House, I hope for the sake of the average American that she will prove me wrong. But I'm afraid that that's not the case. I'm afraid that Hillary Clinton, along with the rest of the Democrats who used to be for the average American, the average Democrat who still makes you believe they're for the average American, I think they've accepted that this is just the best that we can do. I'll see you guys tomorrow.
The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog, join the Progressive Army, and support The Benjamin Dixon Show. It's Ben Dixon! If you like this episode, be sure to share, like, and subscribe.
Consider becoming a Patreon. Go to www.patreon.com/The BPD Show and support The Benjamin Dixon Show.